Everybody knows that when selling on eBay, the more you can list, the better. But when selling brand new items or more expensive items like me who sells watches, the question is, how do you sustainably grow a store, listing more and more items every day when the cost of these items are so high? Well, in this video, I want to tell you how I was able to grow my store from 0 listings to about 180 listings in just 90 days. If you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe, as I will be teaching you everything that I have learned over the process of doing this. But remember, I am not an expert. This is just what I have seen and how I have been able to scale my store. So like I just said, everybody knows that selling as many items on eBay as possible will give you the best results. eBay favors sellers who are the most active, and it makes sense. They are the people who are likely to be on the platform for the longest amount of time and therefore provide customers with the quickest responses, the quickest dispatch time, and ultimately the best service overall. So it makes sense that these people will be rewarded with the most sales. The question is, how do you become one of these people, one of these sellers, when your items are so expensive and you cannot be sure that they are going to sell? And this is quite a tricky topic, because everybody can understand it's not that hard to list maybe 1 to 2 or even 3 to 4 or 5 or 10 items worth of clothing per day. That's not that hard, because these items can normally be picked up for a couple of pounds. The same is true for people who sell things like books and toys. A lot of these items can be picked up fairly cheaply. But maybe you're somebody who doesn't even have the budget for that, or potentially you're doing something like I am, where you're trying to sell more expensive products. Say, for example, on my store, the average sell value is about £42. In a business like this, when you're just starting up and you're trying to list at least 1 item a day, that would mean that you need to spend roughly between £20 and £30 a day on each item. And when you're not making any money, or when you don't have that much money laying around, this is a new challenge. And this is something which I faced when just beginning. Now, admittedly, I did set some money aside to start this business, so I was expecting to have to spend some of it, but there were some unique ways that I came over the challenge of dealing with inventory, and I hope some of these will help you in your journey. So there were many ways that I tried to conquer the task of listing items, especially in vast numbers and of high value. I tried to order in as many items as I possibly could, and that included, single items, so one at a time. This would actually save me costs as I went along. I would also try and buy from suppliers that had relatively fast shipment times. That means that when I wanted to buy a new item in stock to my house, it wouldn't really take that long for that item to be delivered. So let's say I set my store to have, let's say, a 2-day processing time before I was to dispatch an order, and I could get a delivery time of 2 days. By the time I have to send that order out, I have another product laying here ready to sell again. That way I can keep the listing up and ultimately keep getting more and more sales. Another great thing that I did is, once I found out which listings were working, I tried to have 2 of those products in at a time. That way I had 1 product to sell, and every single time that product sold I would send one out, and then I had 1 product spare, because there were the odd couple of days where I did get caught out having 2 or 3 sales of the same item in a day. And at that point I simply was grateful that I had 2 or 3 of those items in at the time. But yeah, what I would definitely specialize in, especially as a beginner without much capital to start up with, I would try and list as many items of a reasonable price as possible. So like I said, I sell things like watches and jewelry. All people sell all different things, but I'm going to tell you about my experience first. Right now, my store's at the point where I can sell watches for, say, between £100 and £200 or even more, because I've built up that bank of revenue and profit so I can now reinvest into the business. But if I was a beginner again and I only had a couple of £100, if you're going along the model of actually buying stuff into your house, I think you do need to have a couple of £100 to invest into that business. But really, I think the best way to do it is buy 1 or 2 items of stock at a time and see how they go. But ultimately, make sure you're buying reasonably priced items. This is something which so many people make the mistake of. If you can buy as many items as possible that are of good quality and a good price, you're going to be providing the best value with as many items as possible, giving you the widest possible scope of customers. Something which people often mess up on. People try and buy 1 or 2 very expensive products with the intention of making £50 to £100 on a sale, and that is fine. But ultimately, for somebody without much cash, that's not sustainable. In my opinion, it makes more sense to sell those items, say £30 or less, to as many people as possible, and then scale up the business that way, taking that profit and simply reinvesting it into buying more and more products. So to summarize everything that we've just spoken about very quickly, the way that I was able to scale this business to having about 180 listings is by making sure that I buy in just enough stock, 1 to 2 items at a time, enough for me to keep the listing up, and also making sure that I have a good supplier which can send me new products very quickly. That way there's not much delay, and every time that a customer buys a product, I have a new one coming and it won't take too long to arrive. This way I can keep a listing up, get more and more sales on that particular listing to the point where this becomes a bestseller and something which I am essentially using as a staple in my store, as I know it is going to be a tried and tested example of something which can sell. Another thing which I recommend doing is listing as many things as you can of a reasonable price. If you've got, say, £500 worth of cash to invest into this business, do not put all of that into one item. Invest that into, say, 10 items or 20 items, or even possibly 50 items. Some of them are bound to sell, and make sure you do scale up using your profits. That way you minimize the risk to you, as you only have the potential to lose your initial investment, as obviously all of the cash that you make on top of that will just be pure profit. So I try not to get too carried away listing too much stuff which I simply can't afford, and that's something which I initially struggled with, but at the end of it now, I get to a point where I know what works, I know what kind of products work for my niche, and I ultimately know how much I can afford to spend on experimenting with new products, something which a lot of people forget in the beginning. So if you're starting out with little to no seller feedback, I would recommend just investing in some cheap items. Don't spend too much money on one particular thing. Build up a catalog of good items. Remember, most of the things that sell on eBay are quite budget to begin with. You don't need to be listing things for hundreds or thousands of pounds. So yeah, the way that I was able to do this is by scaling slowly, listing stuff with my initial budget, as many items as possible, seeing what works, buying that in more and more so I can provide the best feedback and delivery times possible, making sure I keep my eye on the ball with supply and demand, and trying to expand with as many listings as possible that will work. It's hard at the beginning and it does take a lot of experimenting, but you will get there in the end if you carry on. Just make sure you don't invest too much into one product, as if you were to do that, what would happen is if that product doesn't sell, you will be left with an item of high value that you simply can't get rid of, and you'll be forced to take a big loss on it. By having thousands of items or hundreds of items laying around, you have a little bit of money invested into everything, but at least if you were to lose on one item, it wouldn't cost that much. This way, you are able to take less of a loss and your exposure to risk will be wider, rather than having one item where your whole store depends on it. So hopefully that explains the way that I was able to do it. It may work for you, it may not. This is just my experience and the way that I have done it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in our latest video.